Hi there, welcome along to episode 7 of Let's Make a Resin Guitar. And finally, after days of preparation, we do what the project is actually titled. We're going to pour some resin and make a right royal mess. Behind me are the gubbins that I need to make it. We've got some hardener, we've got some epoxy resin, we've got a silicone jug that I can mix it all up in, obviously some PPE, and most importantly a respirator, because the fumes given off when you mix resin are highly noxious, and a drill to do some mixing. So let's get into it and let's make a mess. So in reality I have very little idea how much resin I need to mix for this part of the project. So I've taken out my biggest silicone mixing jug and I'm going to pour 1.5 litres. We're using deep set epoxy resin today. That's the one that takes 2 to 3 days to properly cure and harden. And that means that I can pour a thicker layer. The thin pour epoxy resins would be too brittle. So we need something that can cure for a long period of time. So the mixing ratio for this is 2 to 1. So in the first instance, I'm going to pour in 1 litre of the resin. Now we'll top that up with 500 millilitres of hardening fluid, which you can see is a lot more viscous. Important we get this absolutely correct. And now I've got 3 minutes worth of mixing to do. I'll see you in a minute. Right, 3 minutes later, we've got our glue all mixed up. You can see it looks quite milky at the moment because it's got quite a lot of fine air bubbles in it. Now it's time to put the coloration in, and we'll use some alcohol ink pigments to do that. The reason why I'm using alcohol ink is it leads to a transparent finish. So it almost tints the finished resin to make it look like a coloured glass, as opposed to the more metallic pigments that you get by using something like a mica powder. Right, let's go in with the colour. And the colour I've chosen to go with the green that we've got the body and neck is black. The hardware for the guitar, i.e. the tuners that will go on the headstock, will be black, and the bridge is black. So I think adding black into the resin segments, even in a translucent sense, will help make the piece pop. So initially, I'm just gonna put in 5 or 6, maybe a few more drops, and then we'll mix this in and see what our results look like. Okay, so we've got some progress, but personally I'd like to see that a lot darker. So we'll add in a good dose more and see how that changes the colour. We're nearly there, I think just a tiny touch more. And I think that's our final colour. Now I've let our epoxy stand for a couple of minutes, and you can see there's a thin foam of bubbles on the top. Now if I pour that into the guitar as it is, all those bubbles are going to get embedded in the liquid and they're going to spoil the translucent finish. So we need a method of getting rid of that. Now there's two methods that we can generally use. The first one is to spray it with some isopropyl alcohol, and you can see those bubbles are popping very quickly. The second method is to use a blowtorch. Now given the fact I've just sprayed alcohol on it, I'm not going to be using the blowtorch because we'd be having an explosion in here. So just before I make our first pour, I'm going to go around and spray some silicone oil over the PVC surfaces. Silicone oil is like a mold release spray. What it does is it prevents epoxy sticking to any surfaces that have been treated with this spray. Making the piece a lot easier to get out of the mold when it's finished. Right. Done there. Good. In an effort to be more efficient, I've decanted some of the resin mix into a smaller vessel just to make it easier to handle and pour, because now it is the time for the first pour and I need to know if this first area is going to hold or if it's going to leak. So wish me luck, because the success of the project is relying on this. Here we go. So far, so good. No signs of any leaks. That is glorious. Now the resin is going to sink into the timber despite the fact that we've sanded it and treated it and dealt with it. That is what it is. But for a first pour, so far, I'm pretty happy with that.